Okay, hello. We should be live now. This should be the daily breakdown at On Gamers here, and the name's a bit self-explanatory, so I won't explain it. So today, the people I've got with me, I'm Thorin from On Gamers. Obviously, you know who I am. The people I've got with me, got Kelsey Moser here. She also works at On Gamers. She's known as one of the, I think, what do you call it? A panelist on China Talk? What's your term for yourself?
Yeah, I guess so. That's fair.
Okay, but which, by the way, has come to On Gamers now, and now will be on Sunday at 7 PM PDT, right?
Yeah, it's going to be today. We're going to try to might get a different regular time, but tonight it will be at 7 PDT.
Okay. I feel like tonight might be a different kind of vibe on the show. You might be, might not be quite the same sort of discussion.
Yeah, people have already asked me several times if I'm going to kill myself, so that's good to know.
No, I mean, that is something that you should think about every day of your life. Like, actually, Albert Camus, the famous existentialist philosopher, said that the only real philosophy in life is whether or not to kill yourself. So in a way, that's very shrewd from the Twitch chat / Twitter generation. I didn't realize they were so versed that they'd read that deeply, but no, they're winning me over. So our third guest, because obviously I only like to bring on super popular people who don't get any kind of Twitter hate. So I've got me, and then I've got Kelsey here. So I thought, well, we've got to complete the trifecta, make the triforce of Twitter hatred. So we've got LS here, who also represents another region that everyone hates. So all the American people are loving this show right now. We've got a European person, someone who's representing China, and someone who loves Korea. So with those three combined, I feel like we can gather all the hatred together like a huge spirit bomb, LS, and just blow up the world with our analysis. So how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I just got on watching the games, and everything almost went as expected, like the entire groups A and B.
Okay.
So.
Well, here's what we'll do. We'll just, in general, I don't want it to be too formulaic as we do the discussion. I don't want people to feel like they can't talk about later games if it's the same team playing. So in general, we'll skip around a bit. So I think the best way to do it is just talk about specific storylines of a team. And so the first team we've got to talk about is TSM, because coming into the day, the first team that they had to play against was, they played Starhorn Royal Club. Right. And if we remember, the first time they played, it was a massive stomp. And so you saw all the analysts on the analyst desk were very confident. No, it's definitely going to be Starhorn Royal Club. It's going to be more of that, But actually, if we're honest, if you think of the other Starhorn Royal Club games, aside from the TSM game, there were always times in the other games that actually it was up in the air. Even against SK, against TPA, they actually had times where they won, but it was more like, it's almost like they had a threshold in the game that once they could hit that point, that's when Uzi would take over and they'd win the game. But up until that point, teams could get an edge on them. Were you as convinced that Starhorn Royal Club would 2-0 TSM, LS?
I was convinced of that, but it was for a lot of reasons. The first reason was that I thought TSM wouldn't be able to react to their playstyle in game one. I didn't think it had anything to do with skill. I think it had to do with the traveling, the lack of knowledge that people had on SHRC. Yeah, you have the Chinese scene, but as far as data mining and stuff goes, I didn't think they would have too much ability to really prepare. And then I thought the playstyles of China would kind of startle TSM. That was my belief. And then I thought that by the time that they met for the second time, I didn't think it would have mattered. I think SHRC still would have won for a lot of reasons. But TSM ended up winning. So that was really impressive. A lot of their rotations was really nice. And Dyrus came out big on a Rumble, which was absolutely gigantic. But at the same time, Rise really underperformed. So there was a lot of error going on in terms of itemizations, but also some rotations by SHRC.
To be fair, okay, let's do it this way. What credit would you give to TSM for the win, LS? What did they do right? What did they do better than the first time they played TSM, do you think?
They picked neutral team comps, and what I mean by neutral team comps is they picked team comps that it can do one of three things. Whereas the first time that they went up against SHRC, they picked a very aggressive comp, that's what I would have called it, and SHRC was just able to outplay it inside of the picks and bans phase. I thought the picks and bans were kind of bad, to be completely honest, out of TSM. The way that it went, not necessarily the overall compositions, but how they went about it, I didn't think it was too good. And then in the next game or whatever, TSM I don't really know what to say. Basically, they got a lead and then they ran with it. And SHRC was like clinging on to Baron for life. Like they got it twice, I think, and it still wasn't able to save them. But TSM fell back to like a neutral team comp, and that's all that they needed against SHRC. But I still think SHRC is the better team. But TSM came out on top in the second game.
Kelsey, what did you think of TSM between the two games?
So it was clear, you know, from Locodoco had his vlog where he didn't know the solo laners of Starhorn Royal Club and their names or like what they did. So it was clear to me that TSM came into the first game a little bit under-researched, which, and as LS pointed out, they definitely had really weird picks and bans. They were easily thrown off by the Zillion pick, a lot of other things. And then in the second game, it was a different story. TSM had a much better champion select phase. Going in, I thought that Starhorn would win, with the caveat that they picked Tristana in the first rotation because I anticipated them banning Rengar and potentially even Kha'Zix and then first picking Lee Sin because Amazing is really reliant on that champion. So I thought, okay, then Starhorn needs to pick Tristana in the first rotation because Wild Turtle hasn't really shown up on other champions, in my opinion.
Yeah, actually, in the playoffs, I think his stats were somewhat ridiculous. I think he was like 8-1 on that, and that was like nearly. I think that was nearly all their wins was on that one champion. Just
right. And I thought maybe Starhorn had done some research because they actually picked Tristana against TSM before, and Tristana isn't really an Uzi or Uzi champion. Like he hasn't really played it much at all this season, so I thought that was a research thing. But they prioritized the Janna, and then Lustboy just countered with the Nami, which I think Lustboy would usually prefer to pick the Nami anyway. So, yeah, it was really bad start to the champion select phase. And then, of course, they prioritized the Rise, which was countered by the... In general, it seems like these particular Chinese teams don't know how to play against Rumble. So that's something to point out.
Why is it that today, especially, the Chinese teams all just kept going for Rise, do you think? What is it about Rise that they were so confident in?
I have no idea because they're not the Rise players of China. Cola and Koro in particular are not Rise players. Like, it's really... Every time they've played it in LPL, it's been really questionable. They're much better at, like, the Aurelias, the engaged type champions. Like, we saw Koro had quite a bit of success on Maokai in that last game. So, and Cola, we've seen him play the Aurelia with good success. I think he did he play Rise against TSM before? I can't remember, but it was a better matchup. Oh no, Dyrus plays Rise. That's right. Anyway, the point is that I have no idea why there was so much priority pick on Rise. I think they thought that it was going to be devastating if they were going for the late game because I feel like Starhorn has been playing around with late game compositions a little bit more than they usually do in this tournament, so they're afraid of having late game to challenge them. So that's my theory there.
Okay, if we talk about the things that Starhorn Royal Club did wrong, the obvious thing that anyone who watched the game, a layman, would see would be like the times when Insect like engaged, when actually looked at everyone else wanted to disengage. Just actually, I want to ask you a question first of all. I saw some of the commentators even seem to be drawing the conclusion of that, of like, oh, Insect just isn't good on Kha'Zix. Yeah, if you just even remember back at IEM, that's when he was a monster on Kha'Zix, and that was a very strong champion for him. What did you think of Insect's overall game here? Were there mistakes from him? Do you think... Was he just out of time? Do you think those were just like big communication flaws? What are your thoughts?
I felt like Insect did okay on Kha'Zix. It was nothing spectacular, but when he was having to deal with the fact that like Cola just kept getting smashed, and like there was always like getting caught out or not being in the right places at the right time. But I don't think it was totally Insect's fault. I think Cola is a lot to blame for that game, to be completely honest, which is a little bit weird. To say that an individual player can actually drag the team down as hard as he did. But other than that, I don't know. Like, I don't feel like he did bad. I mean, he didn't obviously do like dandy level hard carry or anything on Kha'Zix, but it's still going to be better than most of the Kha'Zixes in this tournament. So I don't know why people would criticize it.
And then, in my opinion, the laning phase for Starhorn really wasn't that bad. Like, they did well in bottom lane. Top lane obviously had problems because they were able to get pretty easy ganks on Cola, and then he fell behind. He was actually doing okay early. Again, like, the Rumble power spike is, like, level 4 or 5, but he outlasted that a little bit. Korn had a really awkward roam game. Again, I feel like Korn is having these really weird issues with stage fright. Like, he didn't really start to get good in LPL until week 8. So he's had this issue with, I'm guessing that he has a stage fright issue, and then as soon as he starts, excuse me, he goes to a new venue or a new scene or a new level in competition, he's going to take a while to ramp up and get used to it, which they don't have 8 weeks, but... So I felt really awkward with his Fizz because usually it's like a lot of people will ban Fizz against him. And yeah, that was an issue, but I think in general, the thing that came down to it was TSM out-team fought them because Starhorn actually had a lot of rotations that were a little bit better than TSM's. So I do think it came down to the team fighting, and TSM again picked a better team fighting comp. Starhorn, for a team that loves team fighting, didn't pick like the best team fighting composition, so it's on them.
So after this game, understandably, all the TSM fans, they got hyphy, they got really hyped up. They were like, wow, NA over chat. Like, everyone just went absolutely ballistic. But the only problem is, the day wasn't over. Like, it wasn't time to have a parade yet. There was one game left to play. And if they won that game, then they would force the tiebreaker, and that would have been the really cool storyline, because we'd have sort of got like a mini best of 3 between TSM and Starhorn Roll Club. But as it happened, we were never to get that best of 3, because actually SK played the spoiler. They came in at the very end and they won. They managed to beat TSM in a really exciting game. To start off with analysis of that game, the first thing that really jumped out to me, just because it's something that didn't happen in the game, was that Freddy122 apparently never turned up to this game, and SK like had to play 4v5 or something, and somehow they just soldiered on anyway. Like, that guy, he'd been the only backbone in all their other games, you know, he'd been like carrying as much as you can from top lane. What's weird is they won this time over a good opponent, but actually he did next to nothing. He just kept going in fights and getting owned, right? Yeah, anyone jump in here, there's no order.
Alright. So SK versus TSM. Alright, so this matchup was a little bit weird. You might have seen me tweet about it. I was like, well, TSM seems to have Idra syndrome, where like they do really well against really good teams. I'm not calling SK bad, but like TSM's been training in Korea. They've only been playing against Korean teams. They've only been playing on Korean solo queue. And then thus far in this tournament, they played against a hindered SK earlier because they had Gilios. And then they only played against Starhorn Royal Club and the other teams. And then they went up against SK today, and it felt like they were out of tune because the playstyles were so weird. And then on top of that, the other thing for SK that was so weird was Freddy, like, going so bad. But the whole game was really weird. There was like really low EQ coming out of both teams, EQ being like emotional potent, and how it ended was just really bizarre. I mean, the Ziggs and the Swain probably also threw off TSM because, like, when you're playing in Korea, you're only playing against the absolute best of the best picks and stuff. People are trying to play proper comps. We knew that TSM's, I think, most valuable training partners were the Samsung teams, and we know that they're not going to come out with anything like that because they only play math, statistics, what's proven to be good. You know, they do graphs on team compositions, graphs on team charts. They do graphs on, you know, 2v2, 3v3 dynamics, etc. And these champions aren't deemed necessary. They're not deemed viable, you know, for winning's sake. So that probably caught them off. And for what it's worth, you know, when you're at that level, world level or whatever, playing an abstract champion, and like if Bjergsen forgot how much damage X champion does, or Dyrus forgets how much damage X champion does, or like the cooldowns or something really minor that probably throws you off. So it was probably just a really big bundle of like fluster. But obviously TSM wanted to win because, as Monty mentioned on the Endgame show, is that now they're probably going to go up against Samsung Blue, which means that now when they get back to Korea, they're not going to be able to play against Samsung.
It's white, remember?
White, right, yeah. Right. When they get back to Korea now, they're not going to be able to play against white, and Blue's not going to play with them. because why would you help them out against white? It doesn't, you know? So they just lost their 2 biggest practice partners on top of that. So it's obvious that they wanted to win. It's not like they were throwing or something in hopes that they would get a better position, but yeah. And there was a lot to go over that's really nitty gritty, but that's the majority of it, I guess.
Okay, so one thing that I thought was interesting about this game was, actually, when you said the Ziggs pick there, I think that was a really good decision by SK, because you saw one of their biggest flaws in this tournament wasn't just not having the jungler, and it wasn't just players playing badly like Candy Panda playing badly, it was that Jesus had been like noticeably really bad compared to his normal level. And so actually Ziggs is one of his like super comfort picks, because obviously you can play very passively on it, you don't have to worry about getting 1v1 killed, you can actually just like kind of get out of the way of stuff and not have that pressure on you to some degree. And it's not like he carried this game, he just had to just turn up and do his job a bit, right?
Right. He just had to delay the game until the later stages because they had the hyper carry of Vayne inside of it, and then with the Swain and the Morgana, like TSM's dive is kind of nullified to some degree, and then the John is kind of counteracted. But John is like a really strong pick just in general. Even if she gets counteracted by picks or something, it doesn't really mean too much.
This was a game where, at times, it looked like, okay, maybe TSM's going to win, actually. They're doing well in these fights. They're getting control back again. But I'd always thought the underlying story, that they didn't really mention it that much on the actual broadcast, was that all the kills were going to the 2 players who, in theory, were going to carry the game for SK. It was Svenskeren's Kha'Zix was getting super fed, and then Candy's Vayne not only had all the kills early on, then it got all the farm as well. So, like, you were going to have to deal with them at some point. What did you think overall in this game, Kelsey? What do you think the keys for SK were to actually be able to win the game?
I think so. I've always thought of TSM a little bit as like a Chinese team, even though they have no Chinese players. Just because they like to 5v5, right? That's like what they want to do. They snowball off those dragon fights. They are much more likely to group than.
I mean, like you said there, they also want to contest all the dragons, and they want to contest the barons with a fight, though. Like that's kind of what you're playing into, right? Yeah,
exactly. And so SK kind of played the game that everyone says to play against Chinese teams to beat Chinese teams, right? Which is like always have someone split pushing, force them to make these like awkward decisions between all going mid and all going to get the split pusher, and that's ultimately what caught them out in the end. Like, as you were saying, TSM looked a lot of times like they were actually going to win the game. And it was only really until the end when they sort of had this disorganized push mid, they sort of fell back on the very popular North American LCS, like almost base race type mentality. And SK was able to capitalize on like the fact that they were spread out in SK's base, and that's... it came down to that for me.
That really is what people always say, because it's the obvious glaring hole. When you watch the Chinese teams play, you look at them and you go, right, if you want a team fight and you want to contest every dragon, right, if you don't want to take that fight where you know they'll have their upper fight in the team fight, take towers, force them to go away from it, force them to go between objectives, and make... The whole point is, your idea is if they don't have usually teams who aren't objective based don't have very good shot calling. That's part of why they don't do that. They try to just go on their strength, which is win the fight. So what we've seen in the past was Cloud9, especially obviously in North America, this is what they were the masters of. They could make you move around the map, and as they were doing it, they'd get a little edge here and a little edge there. You'd make the wrong decision, they make the right decision. SK was doing a really good Cloud9 impression for a while here. But like you're saying, when they would actually have to have a fight eventually, it was actually in general going TSM's way. They were catching people early, Freddy would always die immediately. When it actually got to that last scenario though, anyone who's been saying that TSM's shot calling's been improving, can anyone just give me, like, what do you think TSM were thinking as they walked into, like, you know, oh, there's a red carpet laid out in front of us, oh, there's a goblet of wine waiting at a table, I'll just surely sip that, that'll, what vintage is it? Oh, poison, oh, how could it be? Like, what do you think they were actually thinking when they went in the base there?
Honest to God, I have no idea. That's why I said it was like an EQ collapse. Like that's the only thing you can chalk it up to. They might have been overestimating themselves. They might have been underestimating SK's damage output or SK. It doesn't make any sense. Honest to God, if like you knew that they could have benefited from a better seed, you would have almost said that was a throw. Like that's. But then again, one game is not representative of a team. You like even these group stages. Like I kind of hate how like people are making comments about teams that are like factual or like set in stone or something, but in reality, it's only like a handful of games, and you can't totally judge people off those games. Like we saw EDG do really, really good against TPA, and then TPA like failed to show up like the next few games, and then you had EDG do really, really good, you know, against the other teams, and then like
you mean Royal Club, yeah?
Yeah, no. EDG.
Oh, you mean EDG against AHQ the first time?
Yeah. Just like the blunders that don't make any sense. It was like games were decided off one team fight, or games were decided off how bad a player was doing. And you know, the public, you know, the 200,000, 300,000 people that are watching this, they take it as gospel that somehow these teams are representative of how poor they do or how well they do in one isolated game. And I don't think that's fair to judge teams, which is also why I went back and said earlier, like when we were talking about the first game, I still think Royal Club is better than TSM, even though it looked like TSM completely outplayed them in the second set, where you could argue that their nerves and stuff weren't flustered and blah, blah, blah.
I mean, I've made this point before, okay, because in Counter-Strike, my background, this is actually almost a rule at this point, which is because we have so many tournaments, and our tournaments are the same as Worlds, okay? It's always a group stage that leads into a bracket stage. There are teams that are really famous for being awesome in group stages and making it to playoffs and then usually going out like round of 8 or maybe make a semi at most. Meanwhile, there are other teams that are championship level teams which famously always just scrape through the group stage. Each stage they get stronger as it goes on, you know, whether that's adapting to the opponent or they just can't somehow output the same amount in the group stage because they know they're going to get through just anyway. Like, it's a factor you have to consider, because one thing I'm thinking going forwards, obviously we can think ahead after we discuss these games more, is people are going to think to themselves that the level they saw all these teams at here is going to be identical in the playoffs. Whereas actually, since there's like 2 weeks, you could easily see, for example, Royal Club, who looked really strong, could weaken by then. EDG, who looked very weak, could fix things by then and be much stronger. And, you know, the fact he got through all that stuff. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion, like you're saying, that these were like entirely representative games. Though obviously there's a trend you could take something from. In terms of the TSM story overall, when they won the game over Royal Club, people would want to believe, kind of like the freak logic of the AHQ prediction he had there, like, well, if they can beat Royal Club once, then they could beat them in the tiebreaker, and then if they can beat Royal Club, they could beat EDG, and then if they can beat, they'll be in the semi-final. You know, like that sort of like, you get almost like getting into a frenzy of like jumping to more and more conclusions. But since they didn't, they lost to SK, and now they're gonna have to play Samsung White. Is it fair? Do you give TSM any chance in this best of 5 against Samsung White?
No, I think they're going to get 3-0'd. You're going to have Dandy having his way with Amazing. He's going to put the central back into non-consensual. And then you're going to have Dyrus unable to make any plays against Looper. And then you have Dyrus's teleport versus Looper's teleport, which Looper is probably on an entirely different tier. And then you have Imp and Mata. Now, we saw that Wild Turtle and Lustboy have been having trouble this entire tournament against like random bot lanes. And then when they're going to go up against Imp and Mata, it's going to be an entirely different story. And then the fact that TSM like scrimmed against them and stuff, like, you know, TSM's probably giving it their all because they want to improve, they want to rapidly, you know, learn and everything like that. Samsung White could probably give like 50%, not 50%, maybe like 75% and still like win a mass majority of the time inside of those scrims. So there's the concealment factor, there's like the fact that TSM also just lost their best training partners and stuff. And the other issue is that this was something like in StarCraft 2, where, or StarCraft 1, I should say, Flash's dominance in StarCraft 1, it was really hard to do well against Flash because there was no Terran in practice that could match him. So in the same sense, the only team that can match Samsung White is Samsung Blue in terms of like just raw skill, currently anyway, that could change in a few months or something. But now TSM doesn't have like an available outlet to play against them. So it's going to be really, really, really hard for TSM to do anything. I don't see them taking one game.
Yeah, I kind of came into this thinking that I didn't think any non-Korean team would take a game off of a Korean team. I still kind of feel that way. I don't think TSM's performances have changed my opinion on that matter. I think that they performed a little bit better than I had expected them to perform. But like we've been saying, this is a group stage. We've seen them play against just League of Legends in general. I feel right now the meta is like really sloppy. So it's easy to force mistakes out of a bunch of different teams, and TSM was playing that pretty proactively. But I think that White is probably the best, Samsung White is probably the best team in the world at forcing those mistakes out of people anyway. So it's just not even going to be close.
Okay, so no chance for TSM overall then. Oh, before we go into the next topics, actually, while we're still talking about Group B, I want to ask you a question, LS, because they kept, you notice, okay, Crepo's pet peeve or his specific thing that he was bringing out in this broadcast a lot was he kept going on and on about he doesn't agree with this itemization of going to the Frost Queen's claim before you have the Mikhails, or even going to that before sometimes getting the mobility boots. What's interesting is I noticed he would always bring it up on the game where the person with the Frost Queen's claim lost, and he would make out like, you know, if you'd had the Mikhails there, you would have gotten this kill over here, and what did the slow really do for you? But what he never really mentioned, this is why I asked him it on Twitter, is that actually if you look, all of the Koreans are prioritizing going to the Frost Queen's claim first. Like Mata does it, and so does Lost Boy do it, and Zero does it. The difference is Zero lost the game, so it was easy to go in on him. But actually I noticed, I even looked up solo queue, Mata goes to Frost Queen's claim almost every time before the Mikhails. Now the obvious answer, like Crepo said, is when you land the slow, it makes landing the bubble afterwards a lot easier. Do you understand what the logic behind why someone like Mata would do it, whereas, I mean, Crepo has a point that if you go to Mikhails, obviously you can just save your carry outright as opposed to just slowing someone and bubbling them. What do you think on this? Because I know you have very strong opinions on this particular itemization, right?
Right. Well, itemizations is one of the ways that Koreans separate themselves from the rest of the world. And what I mean by that is it goes back to what I was talking about a little while ago about the graph statistics, where if I, go up to Pawn or Dade and I ask them how much damage does Yasuo do with a QE, 2 auto attacks at level 5, level 6, level 7, level 8, they can tell me. So when they click on you, they're going to know. The Frostwing's claim, the fact that Crepo can even blatantly say to just rush X item or X item is representative of a lack of knowledge of the support role. You can't just say you must go X item or you must do X. Game variables and how the game's rotating, positions on the map, ward coverage, itemization coverage, X kills, X assists, Drakes, towers, team comps, etc. They all have to be factored in. They're all variables to consider. And this is one of the reasons that Koreans are so far ahead of EU and NA teams is a lot of analysts don't know how to actually properly analyze because they've never seen it. They just hear the term and they run with it. They're like, oh, I know that I'm supposed to break down a game and look at stuff and blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of like if you're trying to do a math equation, okay, and like the numbers there in front of you, and you go to solve it, but you're supposed to solve it with a different method, to say, or a different formula, okay? So it equates to a different answer. So you have these people that are doing what's presented to them, but they're not seeing these variables that are outside the box, basically.
So give me an example of a scenario in which rushing the Frost Queen's claim would be good, and one where maybe he'd be right and Mikhails would be the right approach first.
Mikhails would be the right approach if you're snowballing out of control in the game, because then you would just want to present with an Iron Fortress, basically, where this is something that I talk about a lot, where if you're ahead, you build defensive. When you're behind, you can build offensive or defensive. If you're really far behind, you have to build full nuke. You have to build full defensive. And the reason that I say this is basically, so if you have Mikhails and you're going into the mid game, you have natural ward coverage or something, depending on who their team is, okay? They don't have any stun. There's no reason to rush Mikhails, first off. If they have some stun in CC, it depends on, who is going to be the priority focus. Is it going to be the AD carry? Because not in all cases will it be the AD carry. Sometimes it might be the jungler. Sometimes it might be the top. Sometimes the jungler might be 4-0, etc. So the whole thing with the Mikhails or whatever, you would do it when the game is even, and there's multiple targets and synergy with it, to say the least. And other times that you just would do it is when you're really, really far ahead to kind of suffocate and apply a chokehold. Because at that point, you don't need Frostwing's claim. You can just get further ahead on itemizations, and you can let your Frostwing, climb up and rack up, and you can just keep, dropping the wards and whatever. You can be much more greedy with your itemizations. It's kind of like the Tristana, where you see Imp and Def do it normally. If they get double kill in lane, or they get a kill in an assist or something, you'll see them go Zeal Avarice Blade, and then they'll hold the Avarice Blade, and then they'll build into something else. And then what ends up happening is by the time they turn in stack Shiv, they have 2 kills hidden inside of the Avarice Blade that's not showing up in terms of CS, and it's not showing up in terms of, kills on the map or something, but it's there. It's 600 gold that they refunded. You know, it's kind of like the support mastery that you get +3 gold on every auto attack. Well, if you have that mastery or something, say you're Ryze, and you auto attack 400 times in the game, that's pretty fucking big. That's 1,200 gold. That's, you know, that's half of one of his core items or something. So these are all statistics that people don't consider. And the fact that Crepo can even criticize or even talk about Korean support players or Chinese support players that understand the game on an entirely different level, not because they're smarter or anything, or not because maybe they're mechanically better, but because their coaching staffs and their team break it down much more methodically, but also in a much more mathematical sense, is nonsense. Like, he can't talk about stuff like that. He has no right.
Okay, quite strong opinions there. I actually have a question along these lines, actually, that I can relate to something I want to ask Kelsey about. So, one of these areas where I noticed where people were doing builds which would seem non-optimal, but it's obvious that the player himself does it to specifically suit his playstyle and maximize it. So to tie into the support point, that's something I saw in the first game that Samson White played. When Mata played Nami, he played basically like no defensive items whatsoever. He just went like, basically if they'd have gotten him, that Samson White could have lost some of those fights, but he was literally playing the style of like, well, I'm so good that I'm actually going to go extra other things to be able to do things in the fight, as opposed to worry about getting it more tanky and be able to withstand hits. So basically he just had to be perfect in the fights, and you saw all the wards he bought constantly over and over and over. So to tie this into another example of this, Kelsey, is one of the things they noted today was the fact that in every single game and every matchup, Uzi never builds lifesteal until the last item. Like, basically, he's even willing to go into trades, willing to go into fights, and yet he's doing it where he's fucked if basically he's getting the bad end of it, right? He can't lifesteal up.
I personally don't know the logic that he has, but he's probably comfortable with like one Doran's blade, because that actually, with the amount of auto attacks he's able to put out by using the range that he does in both fights and 2v2 skirmishes, he maximizes a lot of auto attacking and gets a lot of auto attacks, so he's probably happy with just the Doran's blade. Also, yeah, and it's the same theory. Like, Uzi, if you listen to him, or if you have a little bit of insight into his mentality, is that he's like, the casters call him a mad dog or a crazy puppy. He just will always almost go in, and if you watch him play, like, that has often gotten Starhorn Royal Club into trouble. They're a very all or nothing team, and I think that was part of the issue with Team Solo Mid today, and it's been part of their issues in LPL. They split even because they do best of twos in LPL like they do in Champions group stages, where they would split even in most of their games. Like, a great majority of their games went 1-1. And they would just take this confidence and just keep going. Like, there's no off button. If they're behind, if they start out behind, they're going to engage. If they're ahead, they're going to engage. Chinese playstyle is very high risk, high reward. Like, they're not afraid of... Joe Miller made this comment in... Well, okay, EDG accepted. Joe Miller made this comment in one of the broadcasts where he said, there's no reason to contest this dragon when they're behind. Like, it's not uncommon to see an LPL team, like, throw their top laner or something, like, forcibly into the fight to sort of feed and stall for the rest of his team to show up to try to get, like, a dragon steal. And they do this on purpose and intentionally, like, taking the small sacrifice for a much larger gain. They're much more willing to make these trades than I think a lot of teams. And then with those high damage, low lifesteal builds, it's also, like, a lot more common to see these snowball items like the Mejai's and the sort of the occult in LPL games for a very similar reason. Like, the Mejai's Janna, FCZF was the first one to build it, actually, because, you know, people just will naturally think of Mejai's or sort of the occult as kind of an item choice. And it's just very much like, if I can get ahead, I want to snowball out of control. I want to make sure I stay ahead. Even if it means that I'm creating more openings for people to sort of latch onto and come back.
So,
can I sort of touch on the John and Mejai's? Okay. So the Janna Majai's thing is something that's really unique, and we most notably started seeing it on Janna. Sometimes.
I just want to clarify that I know that there's like a lot more logic to it than like just the.
Well, the assumed assumption is that Janna is an extremely safe support. That for the majority of the time she can keep herself safe, and it's extremely hard to actually get a kill onto Janna, despite the fact that she'll sometimes like flash Monsoon inside of teams and whatever. The other thing that's really important to note about Janna is her AP ratios are reasonably decent for a support champion. So if she actually can accumulate a decent amount of CS or something, it's relatively powerful, primarily because of the Monsoon and then also because of the Zephyr. And what I mean by that is it gets the 6% per 100 AP. Well, by late game, Janna can have over 300 AP, and that's gigantic because then that turns your Zephyr into a slow 58%, which is greater than 50%. Which can completely shatter a lot of champions that are reliant on mobility, most notably Ryze. And then another thing that's really good about Janna is the Ryze meta and the Maokai meta. It really hinders them as champions, especially because of the Maokai change where his ultimate is always centered around him and whatever. That's like a really nitty-gritty example. There's a ton that go into it, but her AP scalings in synergence with how her kit works, but also how she plays as a support champion. She's not a Leona. She's not going to jump in and suicide herself for a team with an EQ, WR, my body as a shield type sort of a thing. She's not an Annie who becomes like a AP support bruiser that actually begins fighting and demanding attention. She's not like a support Gnar, as Mata would talk about, that most likely will die. Janna is one of the few supports that is able to stay in an extremely far distance with extremely slippery nature, just because of her movement speed and how she builds and her kit, her cooldowns, etc. That it becomes really annoying. And then if she can hit Majai's full stack, that becomes really, really scary in terms of her Zephyr and also her Monsoon because of how it synergizes with the team. But then also because you're not going to kill her. And then with the cooldown reduction that she's already getting from other items, plus the 15% coming out of the Majai's, it's like most supports aren't supposed to hit that CDR. But not only that, but they're not supposed to offer that much utility inside of their AP ratios and stuff.
Okay.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Let's move on to the Group A storylines now. So Group A was supposed to be very boring today. What was going to happen was EDG would be AHQ, that was taken, and then we'd have the final game. We'd maybe get a bit of hype because would Samsung White throw it? Would EDG somehow rise to the level people expected them to be at and make it a really interesting game? Instead, part one of the throwaway part suddenly became a big deal. AHQ somehow won this game over EDG. Now I've got to set the scene here. Whenever someone wins and loses, unfortunately, like fan analysis tends to be really black and white. Like whoever won did everything right and they were always going to win, and if you ever thought they weren't going to win, you don't know anything. And whoever lost, of course, everything, the whole pick ban was wrong and everything in the game was wrong. Actually, this game, as bizarre as it sounds, there was a while in the game, I remember, where EDG had like 2 kills and AHQ had 8 kills, but actually EDG was controlling the entire game, was taking all the objectives and was basically just closing the game out, and it was like going to be a done deal. How did AHQ win this game, Kelsey?
They EDG. I don't know. Like in the spring, this is exactly how EDG used to play, is they would slowly give up objectives, slowly lose gold, and they would fail to contest things. And I'll give like a little bit of context for this. Like Clearlove, I think in the intro said that they've been scrimming Korean teams, and I think they've been doing it a little bit off and on since their formation, and the logic was always kind of just maximize the amount of time they can stay in the game against these Korean teams. So they would play like very conservatively in the laning phase and then find like one team fight or one win where they could come back in. And so this was their mentality, like don't give up Baron, stay in lane. And AHQ kind of just turned it around on them. They got 2 really good picks with like a couple Name overextensions, and people are like, oh, okay, Name, clearly the best positional AD carry in the world, got hooked. It's like, okay, I never said he doesn't ever get hooked. But yeah, that's more or less what happened, is they had 2 good fights that completely turned it around, and sometimes the team that always wants to kill things wins. Like, you see teams like Fnatic win with that strategy. You see teams like TSM, you see teams like Starhorn Royal Club win with that strategy all the time. So, I mean, there's viability to it. It's just that generally the objective game tends to be better. And it wasn't.
In that particular game, though, you have to say, even if EDG had closed out that game, okay, they had managed to take that bottom tower, the inhibitor, they pushed the game, they just take the game. It's obvious some of their players individually haven't been up to snuff, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Who would you pick out as the ones who have been the big letdown?
So, they've all had kind of some letdown, and then when I talk about EDG, I always point out that like it's easy to focus on Clearlove because he's the jungler and he's supposed to have like the early pressure. And I agree with that. I definitely think that he doesn't have the early pressure that a lot of these better junglers do. But I think team-wide, they just don't have a playmaker or someone to exert any kind of early map pressure to keep them from spiraling like really behind. Obviously, this wasn't the problem in that game, but just overall throughout this group stage, I feel like they haven't really been stepping up to the plate in this early game. And this is very typical of EDG in the regular season. Like, people who only watched playoffs and regionals had this mentality that EDG is so much further ahead than other Chinese teams because they saw them completely destroy OMG in 20 minutes in one of the playoffs finals, force a surrender. Whereas EDG was like just barely squeaked into first place in the summer regular season. It wasn't uncommon for them to lose to the 7th or 8th place team. Just throwaway games. It's almost like when Clearlove plays jungle, he feels like he's playing against like some kind of crazy chess champion, right? Where he has to just mentally focus just to do basic jungle things. He's very much a team fighter, and he'll do the engages and things like that, but he doesn't have the map presence or even some of his counterparts coming to this tournament from China, like Loveling and Insectu. So he hasn't been performing. I made the joke on Twitter that, oh my gosh, you left his lane. Like, he's played Kassadin before in LPL, and he tried to lane with it the entire time. He didn't leave lane at all. He's not a roamer. He doesn't exert that kind of pressure that allows EDG to not fall behind. FCZF, I think, has been performing actually pretty well. But he's not like some god support, right? He's not a Korean support like Mata. And I think Name has been performing kind of like maybe he has cold feet. He doesn't look exactly like himself. I still think he's been performing pretty well. And I think he performed pretty well in the last stage. Some people have made jokes, so maybe it's the food poisoning because there were those pictures circulating of him in the hospital. It's and then Koro is always like really awkward in lane. So I feel like saying this is typical EDG, and that I still feel like we'll see them in 2 weeks and they'll come out and they'll be playoffs EDG and they'll be turning it on. I think they didn't expect to have as much trouble as they did, though. Aaron, their coach, made the statement that they weren't going to really prepare very hard for group stage because they felt like they would have to work really hard to try to do anything against Samsung White and might not even succeed. And they didn't feel like showing all their strategies and all the things they've been preparing. Like, they played Zed, and people point out, oh, well, Zed is really good. Well, it's like his favorite champion, but they never let him play it because it doesn't fit with their style. They pulled out Jace. Like, doesn't really play Jace. Jace is just kind of a champ. Like, the people who played Jace in LPL this year were Koreans. So it's just... They were obviously kind of not half-assing the group stage, like all across the board. And I don't think they expected to lose a game to AHQ. But,
okay,
yeah.
LS, did you find EDG underwhelming? I mean, I don't know how much LPL you've watched, but what were your expectations of them? Was this what you thought they'd be?
I did not watch almost any LPL. I talked about this like publicly before, that I only followed EU and Korea, and then I had people that helped me with analysis from NA and China, as well as Oceania, but that's not really too much. As for EDG, I'm kind of underwhelmed, and there's not enough games to really say too much about Name yet, but I do know that Sungbin, Imp, really, really respects him. And I knew that he was a lot of talk on the Korean servers like many, many months ago. And obviously he's still here and he's still like wrecking things. So that's pretty much that. But yeah, I am a little bit underwhelmed.
Because by the way, let me just jump in here. You do know that's people who don't watch LPL, okay? And so they themselves don't have any basis to gauge how good Name is because they haven't watched him play. A lot of them think, I'm not even joking when I say this, they think that the hype around Name was created by Westerners like Kelsey and like the China Talk people and Monty when he said he was the best AD carry. But like you've said there, I think you've said it before on Twitter, Imp himself actually said that Name is like really good and is potentially the best or something like that, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. When I hung out with him, I'm gonna say in June or something, and I was hanging out and I was talking about random solo queue players and stuff, and I was talking about how he likes the game and everything. And I asked him about Apto. I know how excited you are about that. And I asked if Apto was still the best solo queuer in his opinion. He said no. There's a lot of other players that are really, really good, and some of them are on pro teams. But then he mentioned Name as like an AD carry that could rival him in deft. So that meant a lot, because in private he's really arrogant. Like, who isn't? You know,
yeah, sure.
Give a man a mask. You give a man a mask, he'll tell you the truth. But that means a lot, because usually he's not one to give people compliments. So the fact that he said that about another player, it obviously means something.
Okay, so in that case, I have to ask you this question. Since you have insight into him, do you think he was being political or maybe even fucking with Uzi when he went up to Uzi like, you're the best AD carry in the world, man?
Yeah, I think so.
You don't think it was real?
No, well, I don't know, because I just asked him before this show started, are you guys going to win Worlds? And I said, yeah, or he said, yeah. And then I asked about Blue, and he said, no, we're going to win the championship title. And then I asked him, so like, out of all the foreign teams, who's the best? And he said Royal. So
okay,
maybe it's not, yeah, I don't know. But then again, remember, like, how long ago was it that I was talking to you? Like 1 or 2 weeks ago, he texted me out of nowhere saying he's the best AD carry in the world, not deft. Sure. So like, I don't know. Like, it was really late. It was like 3 a.m. But
I mean, the funny thing is as well, it's obvious to me as to why he would say Uzi is, because think of the style of play. Like, here's a good example. Okay, after Worlds last year, where obviously Uzi was a really standout player and looked really awesome, but at the same time, Piglet was in his prime, and Piglet won the whole fucking tournament, and some games he carried. And at the same time, people who watched Chinese LPL thought Name was better even back then. There was all these reasons as to why you wouldn't pick Uzi as the best. But actually, when I did an interview with Doublelift after Worlds, he was like, nah, Uzi is perfect, man, he's awesome. But again, it's the same thing. Doublelift, Imp, and Uzi, well, Doublelift wishes he was the other three, but in theory, all three of them are the same player with the same style. They all want to play the same style if they could, okay? So I can see why they would buy into that school of thinking. It's the same as if you see, like, Nukeduck. I could see why Nukeduck would tell you that Bjergsen is better than Froggen, because Bjergsen is Nukeduck's style of play. Froggen is like the antithesis of how Nukeduck and Bjergsen play the game, you know? So I think you have to figure these things in whenever players give their opinion, you know? They all have their own biases and their own philosophy on how the game should be played.
I would say, well, hold on, I want to comment on something. I think Imp and Deft are very different in the sense that I think Deft is a tactician, whereas Imp is like a brute force AD carry. And I know that, like I've talked about this before, I think even on the show like a while ago, that Deft has played other roles at an extremely high level, whereas Imp only plays AD carry. And because of that, I think his view on the game, but also his approach to fights and his positioning, kind of like, for some reason, I'm getting like a image in my head about the Cogmaw when Jarvan this was in an OGN game, he got cataclysmed and he waited until like 20% HP to flash out, and it baited the enemy team to stick around longer, and then Blue ends up cleaning up. But it was because he hesitated, the flash, and it was like really brilliant. It was a psychological play. You know, and Imp, you know, you look at their champion pools, and while they may look very similar right now, there was a period where Deft was playing the Trinity Force AD carries, but he was also playing other AD carries that Imp wasn't picking up. Imp was playing very brute force AD carries. Then you have Uzi come in, or Uzi-I, or I completely forgot.
It really doesn't matter.
Okay. Then you have him come in and on Twitter, I think it was yesterday, about how he reminds me of Wei Zhao. Like, the way that he jumps into the fights with his W on Tristana or something is so ballsy, but at the same time, you know there's calculation in it. Because it's almost never a mistake. It's almost never a mess up, which is really, really rare to see. Like, that level of straight up aggression, like, split second, like, he just jumps. Like, he knows how it'll all turn out. I think that level of aggression and tactician is something Imp might admire too. But necessarily, if Uzi-I is better mechanically than Imp or Deft or tactfully, I'm not too sure.
What's weird to me about Uzi-I is, like, when Deft and Name look like they're the professors, okay? They're like analyzing the game, and whatever they do now is going to be based on their analysis. Like, what does my team need? What are my limits of what I can do? Imp is more like he's super aggressive, but he knows he has Mata there to help him, and the rest of the team's based around him, and he can do that to a degree. But the strange thing about Uzi-I, I noticed in the games that they won and they lost, is he does almost nothing differently in the games that they win and they lose. Like in the game they lost to TSM today, he played fine, I thought, in the team fights. It's just that his peel all died immediately and then he would lose that fight. Whereas in that same scenario, if the jungler had stayed alive a bit longer and the top laner had stayed alive a bit longer, he would have done the exact same positioning, gotten in like the 4 extra auto attacks, and he'd have killed everyone. Like, do you have any thoughts on this, Kelsey?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that Uzi-I is actually the captain of the team, and he's one of the shot callers for Royal Club. So we talk about, I'd like to sort of harp on Uzi-I a little bit and tell him that, like, I don't think he's super smart, and he does have a tendency to, like, and he does play exactly the same, like, regardless if they're ahead or behind, and this does get them in trouble because he'll get caught out. I did a statistic a while back before they started to, when Starhorn Royal Club was stuck in number 4 during most of summer, I did an analysis of sort of the kill participation between then and when they started to sort of vie for first place. And they stopped putting all of the kills onto Uzi-I. He used to have 40% of the kills for the team overall, but also he had like 25% of the deaths. So he had more than his share of kills just because of how aggressively he played. So he's not super tactical from that perspective, but also considering that we think about the Baron calls and you're not really sure if Insec or Uzi-I is making all those calls. He controls the laning phase. Like, you know, Mata is the shot caller for White, but Uzi-I is the one who sort of controls when to go in the laning phase for Starhorn Royal Club. So Uzi-I is kind of a gray area from that perspective. I just see him as far less calculating, and I think that does show in the way Starhorn Royal Club plays, even though he is a shot caller and a captain for the team.
So when EDG came out of this disappointing loss to AHQ, they were thrown right into Samsung White, was who they had to play in theory the last game of the group. And if they won this game, there wouldn't be a tiebreaker with AHQ. They'd get through, and they'd have avoided having to rematch the team who'd beat them. But it goes without saying they weren't even vaguely close to winning this game. This has to be, like, I was trying to think during this game of the great stomps of like really top level teams we'd seen, and obviously the most obvious ones were like OMG's second game at Last Worlds, where SK did like probably the best extended sequence of plays you've ever seen, where they took the 3 towers, the inhibitor, 6 kills, just all in a row. And then there was obviously the finals when they stomped on Royal Club in some of those games. I think this might be even more embarrassing though. This was just like every person just destroying everyone on EDG. What did you think, Kelsey?
For Samsung White, yeah, for sure. They had some moments where they got a couple picks. They tried to make some things happen, but they just had no control, I don't think, at any part of the game. And they used a very similar tactic to get ahead, because both this game and the first game between White and Edward Gaming was very similar. Because it was kind of stalled out for the first 5 or so minutes, and then there was a gank top lane, and immediately the bottom lane starts going ham because they know if the top laners are called down in the teleport game, they have this obvious advantage with the lead, the gold lane and the top, so they know that they're very safe to do that kind of thing. And then it just went like crazy from there. But EDG didn't predict that at all. They just let Samsung White get away with it again. I think Clearlove sort of had some inkling that that's where the action would start because he rotated top at first, but he didn't make anything happen. His timing is completely off. Just again, the control was bad. Samsung White had that game the entire time.
Okay, LS. In theory, this is a softball I'm lobbing you up here, but this is an underhand softball, and you've got like a proper Louisville slugger. You're just going to cane it out of the park. So Samsung White, the best team in the world, we all love them. Your friends and mine played this heathen Chinese team who don't even know objective control, and all these inferior Chinese players who don't even, some of them don't even play on Korean solo queue and challenger for fuck's sake. And so they came in there and they just stomped them, crushed them completely. You know, like did some sort of fatality where they ripped their soul out and then put them on a rack and then sent them 4 levels below and killed them again. Like exactly what you were expecting, right? Was this stomp really what you expected?
No, I wasn't expecting this big of a stomp. When it came out of the picks and bans phase, I thought EDG would have stalled the game a lot longer. I didn't think it would end at 33 minutes. Primarily because it was kind of a protect the Kog'Maw comp, but also with double AP. Use Kog'Maw's ultimate to pop the Banshee's Veils if they elect to go into that. Pretty standard like 80 carry pick with the double AP comp. But EDG just kind of got ran over. I mean, there's not too much to say about it. Dandy like picking Jarvan when Lee's open, and his main junglers except for Rengar were open, and he didn't pick them. I kind of feel like it's a little bit disrespectful. The Pawn and the Fizz pick goes back to what Monte Cristo was saying. Pawn was a Fizz Jongen, which stands for like Fizz One Trick Pony. He just hasn't played it in forever. But just because he hasn't played it doesn't mean he can't like pick it up in a short amount of time. And then Imp on Comfort pick, Twitch has been one of his main champions for over 2 years. Like even before Twitch became popular, he was trying to make it work in solo queue. Mata on Janna. It was really standard. Like you can't say anything because I don't think EDG has a very big. Now they have another game, so they do still have incentive to win. But when stuff starts to snowball a little bit out of control, I think they all just give up mentally because A, they said that they didn't prepare for it, and then B, they know that they just have to win one more game because they can't get first seed. There's no way. Like for them to get first in that group. So they know they just have to get second. So I think if the game goes a little bit out of control, they probably just give up mentally.
I also think there's actually an incentive for EDG to get second over first if you look at the bracket. Just because they know they can beat Starhorn. They've fought Starhorn a lot. I mean, it could go the other way for sure. Like I think that matchup is, Starhorn can snowball that matchup, but they face Starhorn. They're very comfortable with that team. And then on the other side of the bracket, if they advance past Starhorn, would you rather face Shield and Blue? I think they'll lose either way, but I think Blue is a more formidable opponent, so I think they didn't really have much of an incentive to even try to make first in the group.
Plus, I actually said going into this group that the weird thing is, like actually, EDG, even though they got the easy group where they were obviously going to get out, they actually got the worst good team to be in the group with them because they essentially got the team most people think are the best in the world, but somehow we're in pool 2. So actually, remember, EDG were the first seed. They in theory should have been getting like an easier team to play. They actually got the one team that not only is considered the best in the world, but it's probably the worst counter to them possible. Just dominates early to mid game. Amazing team fighting in that period of the game, and wants to create fights and aggressively win the bot lane against you. So like that's everything they don't want to play. And as the best fucking jungler in the world, like that's everything that they don't want in a game. And so actually, I think that's part of what you saw in both of the games they played, was that EDG's approach when they're behind isn't like create the Royal Club style, just contest a dragon or go and bait a Baron or something. It's like try and get a pick and then lead a pick into like, okay, take that advantage, now get another one. You saw in this game here, once White were too far ahead, same as in the first game. Even if you got a pick, sometimes you couldn't even finish the kill and they would just come in and kill you. You know, like, it's like you couldn't, the normal approach just didn't even work. Like, there was no real way to get back into the game, right?
Yeah, and that's when they lose, historically. So, like, their strength is always, like, a really mini blue style of play, is when they, like, a blue light sort of thing. I don't think they're on the level of blue, of course, but where they will win team fights from behind. And I think we did see that in the white versus EDG first game. They took, like, an advantageous team fight, and they were able to win one team fight off of white from behind. But that's traditionally how they like to play. They will play 5v5s from behind, but they will prefer to catch someone out of position first, even if the rest of their team will catch up. So that's definitely more how they play. And they have had a lot of success off of baiting Baron. In the first game against White, I think they expected White to behave a little bit more like the teams they're used to fading when they baited Baron at like 20 minutes, and White wasn't probably thinking about, oh, okay, they're totally going to be baiting Baron at 20 minutes, when I think EDG could have almost gotten away with just like trying to burst down that Baron, because White probably wasn't expecting them to do that either. But they got caught out trying to do that. So they will do the Baron baiting strategies, but... Yeah.
So this might sound anticlimactic, but I don't think we actually need to talk much about EDG AHQ rematch, because if you actually think of the storyline of that game, it was only really tense because in the team fights, AHQ would survive and win some of them, but they would win by like the skin of their teeth, gradually, while EDG were getting a bit more part. And every time I kept thinking to myself, if that one guy there just doesn't die, they probably just win this fight every time now. And that's basically what happened. Eventually it became unstoppable. You couldn't kill them by the end of the game. And really, the Westdoor guy had to do everything. Like, unless he just went completely ham, it was not going to happen for them. All their kills were on him. If we just look ahead now to the playoffs, though, because we now know 2 of the playoff matchups, you gave some insights there. Overall, you're still predicting, Kelsey, that EDG will beat Royal Club in a best of 5, right?
I think that when the 3 teams from China are completely on point, it's a rock, paper, scissors where Starhorn actually beats EDG. I just don't think that the execution of their strategy is as good as I think the execution of EDG's strategy can be, because in theory, Starhorn is like the super aggressive early team that beats EDG, right? But they just keep going even in bad places, and UZI can get cut out. So, and lose them the game, and I think that that's something that they're used to playing. Of course, if EDG doesn't play like I think they're going to play, like I think that they're going to turn on the serious button and play much more efficiently in the quarterfinals like they do in the playoffs. But if they don't do that, if they turn out to just suck, then yeah, it's easy win for Starhorn.
LS, who do you think's going to win this all-Chinese round of it?
Honestly, I can't make a logical guess. I mean, I predict Royal to advance into the semis. Okay. I guess. But I can't make fair estimate, because again, I won't go off just these recent games, okay. And I didn't
just on those games at the moment. That's the sense you're getting.
Yeah.
Okay. I can definitely see why you'd say that. They've been the stronger of the 2. I mean, I will throw this caveat out there as well, people. We didn't see Royal Club play against Samsung White. Like, don't go too crazy. Okay, it's true. Sure. Royal Club didn't lose to someone like AHQ, but we also didn't see them have to get their fucking head stomped in by the Samsung White players.
I mean, they almost lost to TPA, right? So, yeah.
What's sad is
they're not as bad as HQ, but
when TSM did get that win over Royal Club, I actually started hoping TSM would get to the tiebreaker and win it, just so we could see the bot lanes of Royal and White go together, because that would be, to me, that's the real like superstar matchup I want. The 2 matchups I want to see is the other way around. I want to see Blue versus EDG, and I want to see White versus Royal Club. Those are the killer matchups, you know, where it's like the similar style against each other. Okay, if we've got those as the round of 8, I'm actually going to say that I think EDG will win it. I think Royal Club can definitely win games off them. We've seen that when they've played in the other matches in China, but I think it's going to be like 3-1 EDG, and things will be fixed by the time they get to the round of 8. Because actually, it's not that you should discount what you've seen now. You should definitely take an advance. Like, that makes me concerned about their form, and they definitely have things that they have to fix. And I don't know that they'll fix all of them, that's for sure. But you can't just take the small amount of form here and go, right, forget all the months before that. That totally is ignored. These 3 days are all that exists now. That's going a bit too far, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's an argument to be made for, you know, I say that EDG in regular split is just like not trying and doesn't look very good. Clearlove has 0 pressure. EDG in playoffs, Clearlove has a lot more pressure. Like, he's actually trying. I think he's just mentally unable to keep up a level of, or a semblance of jungling at all, like continuously, and only when it counts and when he's really on point. And I say that they might have some control over this because it seems like they show up in playoffs as opposed to regular season. But there have only been 2 splits where EDG's even been a team, so it could still just be a complete coincidence, and they might just fall apart. So.
Okay. Do we have any final thoughts before we wrap this mother up? LS, do you have any final thoughts for me?
No. I guess on the Royal EDG topic, I guess I'm assuming Imp made the comment about Royal being the best foreigner team because perhaps they practice with the Samsung teams. If that's true, then Royal has the best practice.
Okay, fair enough. Kelsey, any final thoughts?
Yeah, it's possible. I have no, like, I have some insight into what some of the teams have been practicing, but I think that Cola made some comment that was immediately deleted off his Weibo where he didn't think that they would do well against the Koreans, but I guess their manager came out and said, oh, the Koreans aren't that big of a deal, so we don't know.
Okay, I think that's pretty much all we've got to say here, so let me think. Shall we be professional for this one? Like, subscribe to the YouTube or something, or just on Twitch. I don't even know if you can do that on Twitch. I should just follow it or something on Twitch. The VOD for this, if you only saw part of it, will be up, I think, later today. I'm not sure when they do it. I think they do it around the time of the broadcast, when the rebroadcast. I think they do it when that ends. So I don't watch that because I watch the games live. But after that, if you want the VOD, that's pretty much it for now. So goodbye.